Hey guys, welcome to Mad Scientist BBQ. I'm Jeremy Yoder, and today we're going to answer a question I've had for a long time, and that is, do brisket injections actually work? First of all, I want to start off with a couple housekeeping things. This is a new leather apron. This is a lighter weight leather. It's still full grain leather, but it's lighter weight than the original 3 colors that we have. So look for those on the website in the future. They're also going to be at a reduced cost since the leather is a little bit cheaper than the leather that I started off with, because when I first started, I just looked for the most beautiful leather I could find, and that's what we used, and I love those. But for those of you who want a lighter weight option, we did these as well. Now, into the subject of this video. Now what we're going to do today is we're going to inject one piece of brisket with the brisket injection, and another piece of brisket we're not going to inject at all. We're going to cook them together, treat them the exact same way, and see how the results differ from one to the other. And the pieces of meat that we're going to be using today are brisket flats. And the reason for that is really simple. Number one is it's going to cook more quickly, so that's easier on me. And the second thing is it's lean meat. So if you have a dry point in a brisket, you really messed it up badly. People contact me all the time and they say something like this. They say, hey, I cooked my first or second or third or fifth brisket and the point was great, but the flat was dry. I get that question all the time and they ask me how to fix it. And I've never had anybody say the point was dry. So we're not going to even worry about the point. We're just going to focus on the flat. And because it's so lean, hopefully this injection will make it be more moist at the end when we're done cooking it. So the 2 pieces of meat we got are both about 2.5 pounds. One is 2.5 something, one is 2.6 something. And we're going to follow the directions on this little jar of brisket injection exactly the way they say. And for your reference, this is cattle prod beef injection created by Big Papa Smokers. They're not sponsoring the video or anything like that. I just heard this is good stuff, so I thought I would give it a try. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix up this injection and follow the instructions. It says 1/4 cup of injection to 16 ounces of water, mix until dissolved. That's enough for 10 pounds of meat. So I'll only be using about 8 ounces total of the injection mix, but let me go ahead and get started. One thing I appreciate about this container of injection is that it's actually full all the way to the top. I have bought a ton of things over the course of my life where there's a big container and you think you're getting way more than you are, but when you open the top and look inside, it's half empty. So major respect to these guys for actually filling it up to the top. I appreciate that. 1/4 cup. And now let's mix that up. Mix until dissolved. Looks kind of like beef broth. Now, just a little bit about beef brisket injections. They're going to have salt in them, so they're going to provide some flavor. This one, salt, sodium phosphate, hydrolyzed soy protein, and corn gluten, natural flavors, blah, 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 spices. Here's the thing. Salt really likes water, and phosphates really like water. So if you know a lot about chemistry, you know that phosphates are going to have many oxygens. They're going to have really good interactions with water, and they'll hold on to water. So I think the idea behind the injection is that it holds on to more water inside the meat, therefore you have more moisture. Now, my only question is, most of the time when you cook meat, what you perceive as moisture in the meat is actually rendered fat. So I use this example all the time, and it's really fitting for what we're testing out today. Is everybody's probably had a pot roast cooked in a crock pot or something, and even though it's soaking in water, the meat seems dry and stringy. That's because rendered fat is perceived as moisture most of the time. So I'm curious to see if this actually makes a difference or if it's just hype. If it really makes a difference, I'll tell you guys the truth. I'll say, you know what, this is really great stuff. And if it doesn't, I'll tell you guys the truth. Like, I didn't tell any difference in this at all. But there's no way to really know unless we test it out. And when testing it out, we want to keep everything identical to how I usually do things, except we're going to change one variable. We're only going to change that we're adding brisket injection to one of these pieces of meat. I'm going to season it with salt and pepper like I always do. I'm going to spritz it with half water, half apple cider vinegar like I always do. I'm going to cook it at 275 degrees in my smoker like I always do. So all that's going to be constant. So the only thing that should be different is the injection itself. And so any difference that we see in these 2 pieces of meat, we should be able to attribute as much as possible, because this isn't a lab setting, but we should be able to attribute it to the beef injection. All right, let's load the syringe. Or maybe let's not. Let's find out why this isn't working. All right, so the injector, I tried to use it first, is not working. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe it's my fault. Who knows? But I got this injector instead. So I'm supposed to use about 4 ounces of the injection for 2.5 pounds of meat, and luckily this thing on here tells me the number of ounces in here, so we're going to use just about 2.5 of these, and we should be all set to go. All right, here we go. Whoop. It's getting pumped up. All right, so we're going to keep the smoker rock steady at 275 degrees. We're using white oak today, and I know that brisket injections are very popular among competition cooks, so I think there has to be something to it. I don't know if it's actually moisture or just getting flavor inside the meat. I'm not sure, but we're going to find out. Okay, it's been about 3 hours, and now it's time to check on these little pieces of brisket. My guess is they're going to be probably in the 160s just because they're so small and it's going to cook more quickly. And to check the temperature, I'm going to use my Thermopen and my convenient Thermopen pocket. I'll put a link in the description for both the Thermopen and if you're interested in one of the aprons. But let's open this up and take a look. All right, so when we look at these, we see the fat starting to turn yellow, which is a great sign. We see deep red color. It tells us the smoke is getting on the meat and coloring it. And nothing looks too crusty. Nothing's looking like it's going to burn. So right now we're going to keep cruising exactly like we're doing. We're going to spray probably every 45 minutes or so with apple cider vinegar and water. It's been about 6.5 hours, and we've been going at 275 the whole time. And we have really good bark on the exterior. The fat has started to render really well, and we have good color on the outside of these brisket flats. So that tells me it's time to wrap them. If we temp them, I'm sure they'd be in the 170s, maybe even low 180s at this point. So I'm going to treat them exactly the way I do all my briskets. I'm going to wrap them in a double layer of butcher paper and put them back on the cooker to finish. Okay, temperature 180. And so that's right about where I thought it would be. The fat on here, you can see is rendering. It just gives when you push on it. So we're looking at a brisket that's ready to be wrapped. And so double layer of butcher paper, I'm going to add in a little bit of the liquid just to soften up that bark on the exterior. And in probably about 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, we should be done. So we've wrapped both of these up. I've marked one of them so we know which one has been injected and which one hasn't been injected. And we're going to just put them back on the cooker and keep cooking at 275 until we reach tenderness, which in this case is probably going to be about 205 degrees. And that's for 2 reasons. Usually it's a little bit lower for me, something around 201, 202, 203. But the 2 reasons that it's going to be a higher temperature are, number 1, the flat is typically tougher than the point. So you have to work a little harder to get it nice and tender. Number 2 is because the shorter cook time for these is going to make it harder to get the level of tenderness at the low temperature. So the shorter your cook time, the higher the temperature you have to reach before you get good tenderness in the meat. At least that's my experience. So brisket that cooks for 16, 17, 18 hours won't have to reach the same high temperature as a brisket that only cooks for 8 or 9. But I'm going to put these back and we'll check back in with you when they're done. Okay, so we cooked both of these brisket flats to tenderness. We pulled them off and let them rest, and I've taken them out of the butcher paper and put them on the cutting board here, and the only thing left to do is evaluate the difference between the one that's been injected and the one that hasn't. And to do that, I have my friend Phil, who also does barbecue and he does catering and events, and so he's going to help me have another judge so we get more than just one opinion on if there's a difference, and if there is a difference, how big of a difference is there. Initially, what I notice is in this piece right here, there is a band of fat that's running through it. So we have some of the point that's lying over the top of the flat. And this one, that muscle is not present. Neither is that band of fat that separates those 2 muscles. So I did my best to have a fair comparison. This one might not be completely fair, but we're going to work with what we've got here and see if we can taste a difference in the flavor and if there is a noticeable difference in moisture from one to the other. So first, I'm going to cut a couple pieces of this brisket that was not injected. So I noticed that there's no real difference in smoke ring or anything like that with these pieces of brisket. This one, I have to admit, does look drier. I don't know if that's because it wasn't injected or because the other brisket flat had that band of fat running through it, kind of giving rendered fat to all the meat underneath. So we're going to do our best and evaluate this. Phil, here we go.
Thanks, sir.
This is brisket chunk number 1. All right, cheers.
Cheers.
Here we go. It's too firm.
Good smoke flavor.
Right.
Firm.
And it's dry.
A little dry.
Unquestionably dry.
Yeah.
Whenever I cook a brisket flat, it's always attached to the rest of the brisket. So this amount of cook time is half that what I usually do. And I was kind of curious to see the difference in flavor. But regardless, both of these pieces had the same amount of cook time, so we should be able to accurately compare them one to another. So my impressions on this are mild smoke flavor, but fine. The texture, a little too firm, and not really a lot of flavor going on in this bite. Also, it is definitely a lot drier than I would like. What do you think? How would you evaluate it?
I'd say definitely a little drier than what you would have with a full packer brisket if you're going to cook it with a point. Good smoke flavor, salt and pepper kind of is there, but the moisture, yeah, I can tell it probably wasn't injected.
Right, right. So let's try the injected one and see what kind of difference we have. I'll get this guy. So you guys can see this kind of accordion-like stuff in the middle. That is fat that's rendered pretty well. And so my guess is that this is going to be a lot more moist, and it looks like there's some glistening fat on the piece of flat itself. So let's give it a shot and see what happens. I can taste the brisket injection in there.
I can too. It's a little more tender, just a little bit.
It tastes like beef broth in there. You get that too?
Mm-hmm. A little saltier, a little beefier.
Yeah. It's, wow. Okay. I think I get it. This one, you taste the injection in there. It's like you're getting beef broth with each bite. I don't know that it necessarily increases the moisture of like the muscle grain itself. I think the added moisture in this is probably from all that fat that was sitting on top, but I think it does boost the flavor. So this one didn't smoke before wrapping for very long, about half the time I would usually do. And so this flat that was not injected isn't bursting with lots of flavor. This injection seems to kind of make up for that by adding beef flavor, so it's brought to the forefront. Because one of the things that happens when you cook a brisket is you sweat out a lot of water, and it kind of concentrates the beef flavor, so that a perfectly cooked brisket, you get beef at the forefront followed by a clean, clear signal of smoke, and then you get the rubs and the seasonings. So I think this kind of shortcuts that process, so you could cook more quickly. You don't have to spend 16 or 18 hours cooking brisket, and you get a full flavor in each and every bite because you're injecting all that flavor into the muscle strands itself. So that's my kind of thoughts on it. What do you think, Phil?
You can definitely use it to your advantage with that little flavor boost. So I like that. I definitely don't feel like it's an amazing, well-cooked brisket that is really beefy naturally. It's not going to supplement that, but...
Do you think it would matter on the kind of smoker you were using, whether or not you'd want to inject it?
Possibly.
I'm thinking if I'm cooking on a pellet smoker and I'm just doing one brisket, I'd probably inject it.
Definitely.
Yeah, if I'm doing 25 briskets on an offset, there's not a chance I'm injecting all those briskets.
Yeah, there's no need at all. No.
Right.
Yeah. 1 to 2 briskets, yeah.
I don't think there's any difference in the smoke flavor really, but it seems to be something that would be worthwhile for certain types of cookers and for certain quantities. But if you're, having a Franklin barbecue style operation where you're cooking 106 briskets a day, there's neither the time nor the need to inject it. If you're doing something where you're not getting quite the smoke flavor you want, you really want to dial up the flavor component, then maybe a pellet smoker or something like that, this seems to make sense, and it totally makes sense now why people use it in competitions. Mm-hmm. So if I were to summarize my thoughts on it, if you got a pellet smoker, you're only doing one brisket, and you want to try to get maximum flavor possible, yeah, then go ahead and inject it. You can still get great brisket without it, but it seems to really dial it up one notch from what it would be otherwise. Now, to wrap things up and answer the question that I asked at the beginning of the video, does brisket injection actually increase the moisture in the meat? I don't think so. I think it adds flavor. But just like I've preached in many videos in the past, what you perceive as moisture in your mouth is actually usually rendered fat. I think that it dials up flavor, but I don't think there's a discernible difference really in the moisture between this flat and this flat. So you can definitely get a flavor component, but they're both kind of dry. And the reason I did a brisket flat was it's faster and it's lean, and doing it like this, it's going to expose the cut of meat to being too dry if it's going to be too dry. Even though we injected this with a lot of the injection, it's still kind of dry. So it's possible that it could improve moisture some, but my thought is that it probably doesn't really do much to improve moisture, but does something to improve the flavor itself. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button down below and subscribe. If you guys want to follow Phil, he does great stuff. He's a really good guy. You can find him at
CityPig BBQ on Instagram.
And we're going to put a link for his Instagram in the description below. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time.